this is going to be the nightmare scenario.
Where's my wife? How can I get in touch with her?
I just got in the car and left. I had to get out of there before the traffic got bad.
Many of them got stuck in a gridlock.
They just wanted to get us airborne as quick as we could.
The wings are flexing. It gets your attention.
If you have to ditch the airplane, no one's going to come look for you. We don't even carry parachutes.
The hurricane is headed towards my house. I'm like going, what else can happen?
From the Weather Channel, this is Storm Stories with meteorologist Jim Cantori.
June 1st through November 30th. 6 months of every year. Hurricane season. When the waters of the Atlantic begin to stir, people living on the coasts take notice. And when a hurricane threatens to make landfall, it's time to evacuate. But while thousands run away from the mighty cyclone, one elite group heads straight into it. The 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron of the U.S. Air Force, also known as the Hurricane Hunters.
Our job is to get airborne, go to the worst weather, fly in the worst weather safely, and then try and get back on the ground in the same manner.
Captain Brian Letourneau is a full-time commercial airline pilot and an Air Force reservist. He's been flying with the Hunters since 1993. When it comes to hurricanes, he'd rather play offense than defense.
It was always more comforting to actually be in the air going to fly a storm than have to deal with all the issues of it coming and making landfall.
Letourneau reports for duty at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi. He's part of the only unit in the world that routinely flies into hurricanes.
There will always be a hurricane hunter going to or from the storm 24 hours, 7 days a week until they determine it's either a threat or it makes landfall in the United States.
The hunters collect data for the National Hurricane Center in Miami. There, Director Max Mayfield and his team of forecasters plug the data into computer models. It helps to predict a hurricane's path.
Don't forget that the primary observing system in the tropics is still the satellite, but we can't get that detailed information that you can get from a hurricane hunter aircraft.
The hunters have been around for more than 60 years. In 1943, a barroom dare led Lieutenant Colonel Joe Duckworth to fly a propeller-driven, single-engine plane into the eye of a Category 1 hurricane. He returned to base in one piece and started this group of weather cowboys. But not all those who followed his lead were so lucky.
We did lose one Hurricane Hunter plane in Hurricane Janet in 1955 and 5 military planes in the 60s and 70s in the Pacific. So again, don't ever take these folks for granted.
You wouldn't want to go in there as a rookie to fly in a hurricane, not knowing the idiosyncrasies of how the storm's going to react, how it's going to affect your equipment, your airplane, and of course the people on board.
The year is 1995. It's one of the most active hurricane seasons on record. Already, hurricanes Allison and Aaron have struck Florida's panhandle. By early October, Letourneau has flown 25 missions. Now he's preparing for Hurricane Opal, a Category 1 cyclone in the Gulf of Mexico.
By the time Opal came around, we were on our 15th storm, and most of us had over 30 storm penetrations at that point.
A penetration for a hurricane hunter is like a kill for a fighter pilot. The hunters fly their C-130s into the eye of the hurricane and release small devices called GPS dropsondes. A dropsonde is a special instrument that acts like a weather balloon, but instead of rising, it falls. The officer who launches it is called the drop.
His primary responsibility is dropping a dropsonde into the storm.
The 18-inch tube is equipped with a radio transmitter and a small parachute.
It falls at roughly 2,000 foot per minute, and it will continue transmitting data until it reaches the water.
On October 3rd, Technical Sergeant Tony Lavach is next up for drop duty. He's at Keesler Air Force Base on mandatory crew rest before his mission. Lavach has been studying hurricanes for 3 years, but this will be his first mission into the heart of one.
I didn't quite know what to expect. I just knew that it could be a very bumpy ride.
The rookie drop is trying to sleep before the long flight, but it's difficult. 2.5 weeks ago, he and his wife Barbara found out they were going to have their first child. Now Barbara is alone at their home in Navarre, Florida, right in the projected path of Opal.
With all the events happening in my life, I didn't have too much time to worry about myself. I had a lot of thoughts going through my head.
Around 4 a.m., the phone rings.
I was expecting to be alerted for our storm mission. I was quite surprised when it was my wife on the phone.
I called to let him know that I was going to leave because in a matter of hours, Opal went from a 2 to a 4.
A Category 2 hurricane has winds of up to 110 miles an hour, but a Category 4 can reach speeds of 155 miles an hour.
She said that the hurricane had just exploded overnight. I was stunned with that news.
If Opal stays this strong, a direct hit could topple the Lavaches' home. Barbara wants to get as far away as possible.
The Category 4. That was enough to scare me into jumping in the car, and I just left.
She's gone through evacuations before, but not since her pregnancy.
It's a lot different when you have somebody else to consider. It wasn't just me then at that point.
5 a.m. Lavach and the hunters receive another call. This time, it's their supervisor.
The phone rang. I was ready to go.
But Lavach doesn't look ready.
He had the look that somebody the first time they're going to go fly in a hurricane, not knowing what to expect, you know.
Pilot Brian Letourneau accompanies Lavach to the briefing room, where they receive instructions for their mission.
Incoming aircraft is 966.
They gave us the coordinates of the storm, which turned out to be less than 200 miles off the coast in the Gulf of Mexico. We went out to the airplane, did our standard safety walk-arounds, and prepared the airplane for flight.
During most hurricanes, Letourneau has 2 or 3 hours of smooth flying before hitting the outer bands. But Opal is picking up speed as it nears land. The hunters will hit the rough stuff a lot sooner.
We knew it was going to be a short flight to the storm, and that entailed probably being in the storm a little longer than we're normally used to.
As the Cruise C-130 aircraft reaches runway speed and lifts off, rookie hunter Lavach realizes just how close Opal is.
We'd gotten to the weather kind of quick, being bounced around a little bit.
He carries a St. Christopher medal in his flight suit. The patron saint of travelers is a gift from his wife to keep him safe. But as Lavach watches the sky grow darker, he isn't so optimistic.
There's a hurricane towards my home. I'm flying my first hurricane mission. What else can happen?
7 a.m. At the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Max Mayfield arrives at work. He hasn't heard yet about Opal's sudden intensification.
When I came in that morning of October the 4th, people didn't even say good morning. They just said 916.
916 millibars of barometric pressure. That's what the last Hurricane Hunter aircraft measured in Opal's eye early in the morning. The lower the pressure, the stronger the hurricane. Normal pressure is 1,013 millibars. At 916, Opal is a strong Category 4 with winds of 150 miles an hour.
It intensified rapidly. It started to accelerate. We knew it would have a very big impact on the United States.
October 4th, Hurricane Opal is picking up speed on its way toward the Gulf Coast. Thousands of people are trying to escape the coming winds, rain, and storm surge. The suggested evacuation route for Florida's Panhandle is north, but Barbara Lavach is heading west from her home in Navarre.
Our friend that worked at the weather station on base called and said that it was coming in at Navarre and I shouldn't go east or north, I should go west.
It's a risky move. If the hurricane veers west, the expectant mother will be trapped in its path.
I was thinking of husband, baby, house, you know, everything we had was in the house, but then material-wise, that can all be replaced.
10,000 feet above ground, Barbara's husband, Hurricane hunter Tony Lavach, is just as worried.
Finding out that she's pregnant, I'm flying my first storm mission, and then all of a sudden the hurricane is headed towards my house.
Piloting the mission is Captain Brian Letourneau. As the veteran hurricane hunter levels off his C-130, even he feels some nerves.
Every hurricane is a little bit different. It's kind of like a blind date. You don't know what you're going to get till you get there.
Lavach is finding that out for himself. He looks out the window and for the first time gets a view of the inside of a hurricane.
The water looked just totally black. You could see some white blow off of the waves. That's the only thing that would give it some definition. And I'm like going, this is bad.
He doesn't have much time to take it all in. The plane is coming up on the eye. In a matter of minutes, Lavach will release a dropsonde to measure the hurricane's force.
I was pretty wrapped up with that, making sure everything was flowing smoothly.
The GPS dropsonde will read pressure, temperature, humidity, wind speed, and wind direction. What everyone is most concerned about is if the pressure has gone up or down since last night's reading. If it drops further or remains the same, the Gulf Coast will bear the brunt of the strongest hurricane to hit the area since Camille killed 143 back in 1969.
Once you get a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, it's got to make landfall somewhere. It can't hardly sneak out of there.
Before the hunters reach Opal Center, they need to penetrate the eye wall, which typically contains the highest winds and harshest weather.
The penetration is the most dangerous part of the mission. It only takes 3 minutes or so to get through, but it's the most harrowing 3 minutes sometimes in your flying career.
As Letourneau guides the C-130 forward, winds upward of 140 miles an hour blast the aircraft.
If you were in the airlines and you hit moderate turbulence, you would be landing the airplane as soon as possible, whereas we consider if we hit moderate turbulence that it's just another day.
It takes all his strength to keep the 78.5-ton plane in the air.
The throttles are full throttle, like giving your car full gas, and then all the way back to idle, just to try and maintain your airspeed because the wind shear is so great.
In the back of the plane, Lavach grips his seat. The plane bumps through the wind gusts and hits a downpour of rain.
You notice a couple times the wings are flexing and it gets your attention.
It's like going through a really bumpy car wash. You can't see anything, but you know there's something out there and you're feeling it shake the airplane.
Around 10 a.m., the aircraft punches through Opal's eye wall, and all the shaking stops.
There's no more rain streaming by on the side windows, and you can see clear skies above.
Few people have been in the eye of a hurricane, especially at 10,000 feet. But Lavach hardly has time to appreciate it.
I'm getting very busy trying to prep our instrument to drop into the storm.
Lavach loads his dropsonde and fires it from the aircraft. After a 3 to 4 minute descent, it begins transmitting the essential data back to Lavach.
I'm working up all the numbers and eventually sending the information to the National Hurricane Center in Miami.
At the Hurricane Center, Max Mayfield is eager to receive the information. He's been working all morning to get the word out about Opal's surge in strength.
I remember contacting many of the emergency managers along the coastline, especially in the Florida Panhandle. We thought this was going to be the nightmare scenario.
The numbers Lavach sends back are a nightmare.
930 millibars. I'll always remember that. I knew at that point in time it was still a Category 4 hurricane.
With winds gusting to 145 miles an hour, Opal is sure to devastate the Panhandle's coast. Lavach can't stop thinking about his wife, who is somewhere on the roads down below.
Where's my wife? How can I get in touch with her? And when will I get in touch with her? And how she's doing?
"90 miles south of Biloxi, Mississippi, Captain Brian Letourneau and Sergeant Tony Lavach turn their Air Force C-130 aircraft into the eye of Category 4 Hurricane Opal for a second pass. Lavach keeps a St. Christopher medal in his pocket to keep him safe in his travels. But he can't count on the safety of his wife on the ground below. He launches a second drop sonde and waits for the results.
If the pressure would decrease, we would know that there's still some intensification.
11:30 a.m. The information comes in, and with it, some new hope.
The pressure kept on increasing, so we knew that there was some slight weakening within the storm itself.
The eye wasn't as defined. It was kind of an unpredictable storm almost from the get-go.
At the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Max Mayfield and his team of forecasters get word of the rise in pressure. It's a tremendous relief to everyone involved.
Fortunately, it started to weaken about as quickly as it strengthened.
After 5 storm penetrations, with the pressure increasing on each drop, Letourneau pilots the aircraft toward dry land. Opal is now grazing the Air Force Base in Biloxi, so the hunters are forced to put their wheels down at another field in Texas. Letourneau can't help but notice the worried expression of his rookie crewmate.
Your mind always has a way of making the worst of things, and I think this big thing was he's concerned for his family.
At 6 p.m., Opal makes landfall as a Category 3 near Lavach's home in Navarre, Florida. Storm surge along the coast of Alabama and the Florida Panhandle is up to 15 feet.
If people had stayed in many of those homes, the loss of life could have been very, very great.
Exhausted from his grueling mission, Lavach checks for weather information around his hometown. It's not good news.
I hear a weather report saying that they've had wind gusts in excess of 130 miles an hour, and I'm like going, oh.
He's still unsure of his expectant wife's whereabouts and whether or not she's safe. 240 miles away, Barbara Lavach has taken cover in a Louisiana hotel room. She watches the same reports about the hometown she left behind.
They kept talking about how Navarre was a war zone, and all they would show was the roofs off the houses and boats in the middle of the road.
Early the next morning, each sets off separately for Navarre, both hoping their house still exists. As Tony gets closer, he's shocked by the damage from Opal's massive storm surge.
I come up to some townhouses about 3 miles away from my house, and I see basically their furniture on the north side off Highway 98, and I'm like going, oh boy.
Tony arrives first. The home stands right where he left it, with minimal damage. But the father-to-be can't relax until he finds his wife.
Well, when I drove up to the house, Tony was out in the front yard, and he was smiling. And
just seeing her, made it back safely, and everything's okay. She's fine. What more can I ask for?
1995 was only the start of a very active hurricane period. One Max Mayfield says might continue for some time.
We've had more tropical storms and more hurricanes since 1995 than any other 10 consecutive year period on the record. So make no mistake about it, we're in this active period that may last another 10, 20 more years.
For Hurricane Hunter Captain Brian Letourneau, that means one thing: more chances to do what he loves.
You can talk about it, read about it, and see it in pictures and whatnot, but I think the full-blown experience of flying through a hurricane just speaks for itself.
10 years after Opal, Tony Lavach has moved from rookie to veteran hunter.
1995 changed my life.
And now when he comes home from a mission, it's to his wife and son.
I always tell Tony when he's flying to make sure you get your St. Christopher's medal, so it seemed appropriate to name our son Christopher.
What is the history behind the naming of hurricanes, such as Opal? We'll tell you when Storm Stories returns. So what is the history behind the naming of hurricanes such as Opal? For hundreds of years, hurricanes in the West Indies were named after the actual saint's day on which each hurricane hit. Later, hurricanes were named after their latitude-longitude positions. but the practice was too confusing. Published in 1941, the novel Storm started giving women's names to these extreme weather events. Then in 1979, male names were added to the list after protests by feminist groups. For Storm Stories, I'm meteorologist Jim Cantori. Your local forecast is next.
After Storm Stories, Abrams and Bettis comes to you live from the Weather Channel studios in Atlanta, Georgia.
And the tropics are active with 3 different areas of interest. The hurricane hunters even flew into one of those areas today. What did they find? We'll tell you next on Abrams and Bettis.